rolling.
Cool. So, the first question I asked is what do you call the music that you make? What is that music?
I've always just called it sample-based music, you know.
Hold on. The questions that I ask, try and answer them with the question that I asked, so that you don't have to use me.
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, to describe the music I make, I usually just call it sample-based music. I kind of like the most vague term. I think with a lot of electronic music, terms come and go, and trends come and go very quickly as compared to other sorts of music. So, you know, whenever we say mashup, which is fine, there's mashup influence in my music. It obviously has mashup elements. You know, a lot of people there was a backlash a bit towards mashups just because they got so popular so quickly. So whenever we say mashups, it doesn't necessarily represent everything I'm trying to do. And whenever you say, you know, DJ mix, it's clearly what I'm not trying to do because I'm trying to do my own thing. So, you know, there's, you know, Plunderphonics, I think is a term I've always taken to heart. Is, you know, John Oswald is kind of the first step I've ever gotten into this sort of thing. And, you know, I think to a degree I'm trying to do similar things. You know, just cutting up pop music, trying to make zone music out of blatant pieces of other people's music, I think, which is exactly what I'm trying to do. So I like the term Plunderphonics, but a lot of people don't know that word. So, you know, I usually just say sample-based music, period.
We actually had some kind of a train or something passing in there behind, so we might want to have a question again.
Okay, and is his sound level okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, cool.
It's beautiful. Super fat. This is great.
Cool.
Sound.
I got a late night deep voice going on. I can feel it.
It's great. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
Should I re-say that again?
Sure. Yeah. In terms of why don't you go and try to compress it to be more about Oswald.
Cool. You know, to describe my music, I'd usually just say sample-based music, just because it's kind of the simplest, most vague term, and a lot of times, you know, genres come and go in electronic music, and backlashes come and go equally, and then I also kind of take the term Plunderphonics to heart a bit, just because got into sample-based music. I think first person I ever heard really was probably Evolution Control Committee out of Columbus, Ohio, but then through him, he had a tape called Gunderphonics. And then eventually, you know, if you dig a little deeper, you find out about Plunderphonics, which is the term invented by John Oswald. And then once I looked into that, you know, he's clearly one of the pioneers of this sort of thing, you know, chopping up pre-existing pop music, trying to make his own new pop music out of other people's pop music. And I think that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So I've always liked the term Plunderphonics. I'd like to think I fall within that genre. I don't know if John Oswald would give me the sign of approval or not, but, you know, I'd like to think so.
I've asked him about your music. He likes it.
He does? Cool.
In the stuff that he was doing, he was reacting a little bit to like this whole. There was an element of like cultural self-defense in what he was doing. Do you ever feel that?
No, I mean, yeah, I understand. And I've even read. I mean, I don't want to misquote what he's into or anything, but you know, the way I always understood was, you know, he was almost a bit, you know, bored with the music and trying to make it more exciting and more progressive for himself. And just my standpoint's a little different. I've always been a pop music fan. So with my music, I'm trying to embrace the elements I like. And granted, it is this new weird form, which you could perceive as something a novelty or tongue-in-cheek, because I do manipulate it and take it to these extents. But I come from the perspective, I just like pop music. I always have, from all genres, and I like to kind of celebrate, you know, pop music. So my music is a bit more of a celebration rather than a response or any sort of subversion of the source material.
What do you like about pop music?
I don't know. I think the whole machine of pop music is interesting to me, just how it works and, you know, how much effort has to go into creating a character and all of that. But simultaneously, it just seems like one of the most direct forms of, you know, pleasure music. So many underground forms are, you know, trying to be cooler or more artsy or more underground than whatever. And, you know, it's that complex of underground music that everyone, you know, it's that indie record store clerk complex that, you know, this person acts like he's cooler than you, he knows more than you, he heard about this band before you, and that seems just very like middle school and childish to me. So I've always just liked how blatant pop music is. Once you're out there and you're on the radio, you're out there and you're making music for everyone. I think that's just a cool, amazing concept. And I think they're kind of the most direct people calling the shots, and like, what's wrong with wanting to make melodic music that everyone loves? I mean, it's kind of an obvious thing. You don't necessarily have to be progressive to be making important music. I think even the most, manufactured pop group to a degree, has some of that sensibility with them. So I've always liked that, and it's just interesting. I think once it gets to that level of exposure, it's just a really weird thing. I've always liked, and it's just music that people can relate to. I love going into a bar and going to the jukebox and putting on a song, and everyone just getting into that individual Kansas song or Queen song or Belle Biv DeVoe song, whatever. There's this universal standard, and just like, to me, music is about making those connections and having this sharing bonds with people. And I think to a degree, pop music does a great job at that.
Sorry, quick one.
Are you looking into the camera, Saitan?
No, still at me.
Still to Brad, but just that should just be closer and lower. If you can slouch, that would be great.
I already feel kind of
Yeah. We all gotta suffer. I'm on my knees, baby.
All right.
Is this on?
This, like, for you, pop is like populist rather than like pop as in bubblegum pop kind of thing?
I think it's both, to a degree. I mean, I like both versions, so no reason to necessarily separate. I like underground pop music as well. Even that, is kind of making an attempt to be accessible, I think, is an interesting concept. And I do like, I've grew up with noise music in middle school and high school, so I like, the extremes a bit, but, I'm not dedicated to pop, and anything experimental is not worthwhile because they're not trying to touch every single person. I don't feel that way, but I do think, a lot of people dismiss pop for its simplicity, and I more or less kind of, embrace it for its simplicity.
But it seems like pretty important to what you do that everybody that's in the crowd knows the songs that you're using.
A bit, I think so. But it is weird these days because I play to a younger crowd, even younger. I'm 25 years old, and I think a lot of people come out to my shows are in between 16 and 25, I'd say, is the main crowd. So, I know a lot of those kids don't know the source material, and based on the amount of emails I get, I know people don't recognize it. I know for me, I grew up listening to hip-hop that was based on samples, a lot of, from sampling Kraftwerk to sampling, 70s funk stuff. Sampling Parliament, but and at the time I didn't know what George Clinton was, but I think just the act of taking, as opposed to playing a traditional instrument, chopping up a pre-existing source is an aesthetic. Like, you can tell that sound. Whenever I was growing up and I was in 3rd grade, I wasn't making a conscious decision that, oh, I like this because they're sampling music, but I did like the sound of it, and I think to a degree I could tell that, scratching records, that sort of thing, just manipulating pre-existing source is a sound in itself. So I think to that degree, a lot of kids hear my music, they might hear a guy like James Taylor singing over top of a hip-hop beat. They might not know who that is, but you can recognize that, it's kind of an older recording, and I'm, placing that voice most likely in where it wouldn't normally be. So, I think the main value of my music is recontextualizing familiar elements. So anyone who does recognize, I think that's where I come from. I make my music thinking about my friends. I think my friends would recognize 90% of the stuff I sample. But I know, I sample a lot of pop music, but it's pretty random assortment. I sample the Boredoms on there, or Sonic Youth, or some newer stuff. So I don't really expect everyone to recognize all the samples. I don't think that takes away from it. Even my parents, recognize the older stuff and don't know the current rap music. I think a lot of young kids recognize a lot of the rap music, but don't understand, know the older stuff. So it is nice if people do know, but I don't think it's necessary.
So how do you explain the reaction? You okay?
Yeah, just giving myself another quart. Go ahead.
Like, just being at your shows, and like I've been to like 3 now, and I get the vibe of like ecstasy that's going on for some of these kids in the shows. Where do you think that comes from? Like, that super happiness. Why does your music in particular create that?
I think I don't have a definite answer for that, but I think there's a few different directions. One being, if you do recognize all the source material, you're just saying, I love that song, and you're just going crazy to it for 30 seconds, and then, oh man, I love that song, I'm going crazy to it, or I hate that song, I'm gonna go crazy to it, I can't believe how he's manipulating that. So in that regard, if you recognize that, I can see that it's so, attention deficit, it goes very quick, highlights a lot of, peak elements in songs. It's a simple formula, to do that. But also I think it helps that people who come out to the shows already know they want to have a good time, and it is a bit like a concert, because they're going to see a guy create this music that's my music. Mm-hmm. And it's like they're coming out to hear girl talk songs occasionally, and whenever I play stuff off my albums that they like, they'll get into those particular parts. So in that regard, it's kind of like, going to see Michael Jackson and crying in the front row. Not that anyone's crying on my show, or not that I'm Michael Jackson, but they're coming out to see this guy make this music that they like. So it's like a rock show, but simultaneously it's danceable and all those recognizable elements. So it's also like a dance party. So I think walks a line there between just being like going to a dance club, you can have a good time, obviously, that intermixed with this rock energy of just going nuts. And I also think that people who tend to be into my music have to be at least willing to be into everything, because that's kind of the perspective I take on the music, is that even songs I don't necessarily like that much, there's probably at least a piece of it that I could use, or something, at least the concept of it, or at least one lyric I could find that I could like in it. And I think, to be into Night Ripper, to be into this sort of thing, you have to be a bit willing to say, all right, that song's traditionally uncool, but I'm just going to get into it for this reason. I like it for this particular reason. I don't care what everyone else thinks. So I think that helps that, my fan base, or these people who have already admitted to being into all of these wide variety of things, I think that sort of crew is the type of crew who's going to go, I don't care what people think if I get up there and dance on the stage. I don't care if I don't know how to dance, I'm going to take my shirt off. And I don't care, if it's going to be embarrassing, I'm going to rip Greg's shirt off. You know what I mean? So I think it helps is this non-pretentious attitude that I try to bring to the music. And I think, people get that vibe from me, that I invite them on the stage and that sort of thing, that, I'm not some Michael Jackson, you can touch me, you can do whatever you want with me, you can unplug my computer if you want. So I think in that regard, people feel a little bit of a connection, or are willing to, go that extra step and just go crazy.
Mm-hmm. Does it sound still good?
If you're you attract the sort of image you give off. Your crowd is probably similar to you. So I think it helps that I've just pushed that idea that, like, who cares about, the traditions or whatever, the status quo or whatever everyone's saying. Just get into whatever you're into. That's kind of the idea I pushed, and I think I think it reflects a little bit in the people who come out.
But I think there's something about sample-based stuff, and especially like that you play with pop music. There seems to be this idea that you're kind of playing their emotions a little bit as part of the art of what you're doing. You're touching, like, the song that they first made out to, and the song that was playing in the graduate year. Like, do you think that's true?
Yeah. I think, the nostalgic factor is very big, and for me it is. I mean, that's the way I make the music. Everything I put on there, I have some sort of connection with, and I think that's kind of the power of sampling, is that you're able. I've always loved that in hip-hop sampling throughout the history, that you recognize this song in this particular context and you have a particular memory of it. They're just going to take that emotional bond to that and just do whatever they want with it and flip it and put a new beat on it or reverse it. I think it's great. It's just so, I don't know, a lot of times pop music or music from different genres seems untouchable. Elton John seems untouchable. Obviously, they create that, they force that idea in your mind that these people are superstars, they're untouchable. So just being able to just manipulate and do whatever you want, and just kind of put Elton John in a headlock and just, put a beat behind him and pour a beer on his head. I think, people just celebrate that. So that's the joy I've always got out of it. That's how I loved it in hip-hop, people sampling the weirdest stuff and just doing whatever they want and putting in this whole new context. So I think, definitely I'm manipulating people's connections to songs. I think that's part of the fun and the joy of it.
Mm-hmm. That must be a fun power to be able to have. What's the difference between your old shows and what's happening now? Mark was telling me, there was an explanation you gave in the car that was kind of, you'd realize something about the kind of parties that you wanted to create.
Yeah, I mean, during the early shows, the music was a little bit more experimental, so the performances used to be more theatrical. Because I knew from day one, I watched a lot of experimental electronic shows, and that's what I was doing initially. I knew those shows were oftentimes boring, and I wanted to have a fun show. So the early shows, I was always pushing this, you gotta have a good time, you gotta party, but the music wasn't necessarily there yet, it was kind of weird music. So during the early shows, it's kind of theatrical and, outfit changes, fireworks, dance squads, and stuff like that. And then I think over time it became, it's kind of, it's a clear thing where the more, basic, the more accessible parts got people going a little bit more, the more mashup elements, because I did a lot of beat work where it was all sample-based, but you couldn't hear it because it was taking tiny, tiny fractions of sounds. And, the highlights of the shows, the points where people were going crazy, was always kind of the blatant mashups, the straightforward beats. So it was never a conscious decision.